Hello, everyone. It's April 23rd, so that's time for another edition of Wednesday with Walton and Reis here at thecardinalnation.com in video form and in audio form at the Scoops Sports Network and all your favorite podcast apps. Hello, Kyle. How are you?
I'm doing really well, Brian. Yourself?
I'm doing better than Memphis rotation right now.
Yeah.
Bad news on Monday. I guess it was Tuesday when I don't know, Monday or Tuesday, doesn't matter. Sem Robberse, who was their number 5 starter, albeit, but was coming off his best out. He was the bookend starter last week for Memphis in their series. So he started on Tuesday and again on Sunday. Tuesday, he was exceptional. Threw 5 shutout innings, struck out 6, kind of looked like maybe he was, going to get going well, and then just got blown up on Sunday. 9 hits, 7 runs in less than 3 innings. And then he goes on the injured list. And, it's not only about Sem, who's on the 40-man roster. Probably wasn't the first guy to be called up, but, could be an option for St. Louis along with Graceffo and McGreevy. But, he joins three other Memphis starters on the injured list in Quinn Matthews and Tank Hentz and, Drew Rom. So they've got 4 healthy starters now, if you include Alex Cornwell, who's been pressed into duty. What's your take on the news? Did you see anything or hear anything about it? I didn't. The nature of his
The only thing I saw was that on Sunday he did start having diminished velocity. I was not watching the game. That is a game I was not able to watch. I only went back and saw some of the stats, but yeah, it's bad for Memphis. I'm sure we'll end up. It's always easy to think that the promotion will come next, but I do wonder if all of a sudden, kind of like they did with the catcher, where they brought in a catcher kind of out of nowhere, a 27-year-old depth catcher. I'm sure there's somebody floating around that has been a minor league journeyman who they can bring in to fill that spot. I still think, and I'm still pushing for Curtis Taylor to get a chance at a rotation spot for Memphis, but it doesn't really seem like that's in the cards just yet. So I don't know what to think. I'm bummed. It's a bummer, Brian, is what it is.
To the Curtis Taylor comment, Memphis has 11 relievers, 11 right now. So it seems, and some of them are, stretched out to be long guys, including Taylor. So, maybe they'll give him a shot. To your other comment, the Cardinals have signed 10 players as minor league free agents in the last 60 days. 10. So, that tells you that they were worried about depth. As you mentioned, they signed a guy in Jersey, a third string catcher most recently, but they've added pitchers as well. So, maybe there's somebody out there on the waiver wire that they could bring in.
Yeah, if you're not developing at the minor league level, you get yourself into a lot of trouble, Brian. I think about, you kind of mentioned that a couple of weeks ago, just how much trouble you get in if you can't end up developing people at a clip. And I feel like that's one of the things that's kind of changed in the last 5 or 6 years for the Cardinals. And not just with like the top end talent, but with those minor league organizational soldier depth guys. Think about somebody like Michael Curiali, an infielder who's still at Peoria. He was a highly touted prep player who fell, didn't really have the collegiate success that people thought he was going to have. And really, this player is the kind of player who should be at Springfield, who in past years would be at Springfield and be at Memphis. And he just never played well enough, even with the lack of infield depth that they've had at the upper levels, to warrant that. And when you don't have those guys taking those steps, even the guys who are never supposed to get above AAA, whether it be a position player or a pitcher, it really, really hurts the organization. And I think it also helps create kind of a clearer picture or a clearer understanding of how the major league team kind of got into some trouble as well. So not to drag the organization down with another IL member from the Memphis rotation, but you can see how these little dominoes have had an effect on the organization and the organization's health and the major league's win-loss record for 5 to 6, if not longer years.
And they lost another player as well, Michael Hellman, who's a utility guy, can play infield, corner infield, outfield, a versatile guy. Now they did get, of course, Michael Ciani, who was sent down when Mason Wynn was activated. But they're still at least one player short on the Memphis roster. They could bring up Ramon Mendoza or somebody from AA. I don't think it'll be Wetherholt this quick, so let's not get excited about that yet.
Yeah, he's got a tummy ache too. My understanding is he's been dealing with some stuff in his tummy.
Yeah, I bet his tummy'd get a lot better if they told him he was going to AAA.
Yeah.
Chug a bottle of Pepto or something. I don't know.
Yeah, all of a sudden he'd crave barbecue, right? He'd be like, "All right,
Exactly,
cool, I got
exactly.
room."
I'll put Pepto on my ribs.
Yeah,
But and Memphis is, in terms of when Springfield's playing well, they're contending at the top of their division, as is Palm Beach. Memphis is, playing 500 ballish, which is about where they've been the last few years. The only affiliate that really has struggled is Peoria, and as we've talked about before, uh, basically their whole rotation are guys. Almost all were guys that were in low A last year, so it's their first opportunity at the higher level, and the fact the offense, doesn't really have a lot of firepower. We've got hopes for Levinson and Cho and Joshua Baez, but it's hard to see, right now, there's nothing really going on offensively that makes Peoria look like a playoff club.
yeah, no one's taking a step. That's really what it boils down to for Peoria. Ryan Campos hasn't taken a step yet. The acclaimed catcher.
Hit his
Uh, you
first
know,
home run the other day, for what that's worth.
yeah, great. I mean, that is a great point. He did have a nice little weekend, really.
Yeah.
But from top to bottom, some of those guys will show flashes. Before you and I started recording tonight, Joshua Baez had just got a hit. But it's like none of those guys are taking their opportunity and turning it into something more just yet, and that's really, really hurting Peoria. And then one of the pitchers that I'm high on, that I know you're high on, that Blake was high on, that our good friend Kareem was high on, Darlin Saladin or Saladin, is just getting blown up, and he's not showing the same, I don't know, the same pitching acumen or something that he showed even last year at Peoria. And
Yeah, it's really surprising.
yeah, yeah, it seems like there's two things that I'm noticing, and maybe I'm just looking for it. One with Darlin is that he is, the approach angle that he throws from, it allows him to mask his fastball up in the zone, and he would get a lot of swing and misses, and he would get a lot of people to just sit in the box and look at that pitch. And I think what we're seeing now is a lot of hitters are realizing that anything up in the zone is going to be a fastball, and anything low in the zone is going to be something else. Now he's been able to strike guys out with fastballs low, but I think that they've cut him in half, assuming that his most effective pitch, being the fastball up in the zone, is something you're going to see a lot. And since his secondary stuff isn't elite, it's not plus plus, it's not 60 grade, they can sit on those pitches as well. So I just think he's adjusting, and then it doesn't seem like he's completing his mechanics, and he's throwing a lot of pitches right down the heart of the plate. He let up a home run tonight that was a pitch right down the heart of the plate that they were just sitting on. So
And Kyle's talking about Darlin Saladin. Gerardo Salas is another one who moved up, was pretty successful at Palm Beach. Maybe he doesn't have the same stuff as Saladin, but Salas has also been knocked around in his first, 3 starts or so.
yeah, that's been unexpected. I didn't expect him necessarily to be as effective as Saladin was last year. I thought he'd have some struggles. He's more of a command pitcher. He's got a really interesting breaking pitch, and his fastball can get in on hitters at a low mid 90s. But I just thought he had more of like a starting pitcher presence about him. He always seemed to command his arsenal really well at Palm Beach, and I'm surprised to see him struggle the way that he struggled. Uh, with all of these guys too, Darlin Saladin a little bit less because he struggled early in starts. But it seems like with Salas, it's like he might have kind of a weird first inning, but then by the time he gets down to the back of his start, he gets beat up a little bit. It takes him a while to get going, and then he gets beat up because he's kind of wore down. So yeah, look, I just think some of these guys are having a little trouble adjusting to the new level, and we'll see how they adjust and how the Cardinals pitching brass gets them to adjust in the meantime. But yeah, it's been frustrating. I can imagine that it's a frustrated clubhouse in Peoria, particularly.
Yeah, and it's not completely sure what they're doing with the rotations. Showalter's in and out. I don't know if he's tandeming and Winquest, and it's not clear. I mean, they have 6 guys who are apparently, somehow in the starting mix.
Yeah, I can't make heads or say when Showalter started last week, like 2 days after you and I were like, they're using Showalter out of the bullpen. And then he started. I thought somebody's playing tricks on us, Brian. Somebody's trying to make us look bad. But it's not just with those guys. It's happening organization wide. Some guys will have been relievers, and now they're starting. It's been kind of interesting, especially at the lower levels.
Yeah, and in Peoria, of course, Chenwei Lin, who was the tall 6'7" very successful pitcher at Palm Beach last year, has been on the injured list. He was fine in spring training, suffered some kind of injury apparently late in camp, and is still on the injured list. So even Peoria is down a starter. Just like at Springfield, where of course Cooper Jerpy, we talked last week about the bad news about his elbowing out for the year, but they still have three lefties in the rotation. And if Memphis needs another starter, we talked about before. We're in agreement. We'd like to see Roby move up, but Max Rajic, has been at the level now, starting his third partial season, and he's another guy that has been durable, dependable, and he was pitcher of the week in the Texas League already once this year. So maybe it's Rajic, and maybe they give Roby more time to stretch out.
I'm really anxious to see if they do decide to promote. And I think even Bryson Mounts deserves a little bit of talk. All three of those guys are kind of interesting because as pitchers have fallen off a cliff and gotten hurt, all three of those guys have had large workload. Well, not Roby. I mean, I don't know what I'm talking about with Roby. I could not be any more wrong. But with Mounts and Rajic, both of those guys have been able to handle a nice workload. Now, of course, Mounts is brand new to Double A. It's his first year there. Like you said, Rajic was there all last year. So I do think that there's options if they wanted to go down into Springfield and give a guy a chance, depending on the severity of Sem Robberse's injury and where Drew Rom is in his rehabilitation, in particular, because I still think we're a little ways away with Quinn. It doesn't sound like Quinn Matthews is it might not be quick for Quinn, is my understanding, but we'll see.
Yeah, it's disappointing, and it also, and I'm getting way ahead of myself talking about the trade deadline, but if let's say St. Louis is at a point where they want to trade assets, Eric Fetty's a guy that's gonna get some demand in the marketplace, and if they have one other fall out of the rotation, they're gonna McGreevy will fill the first opening, but after that, it's like, okay, we bring up Graceffo again, and after that, there's nobody.
Yeah, I don't even know what they would do. I really don't. I don't know if all of a sudden you'd see like Ryan Shreve in the Cardinals rotation because they wouldn't want to burn anybody, or maybe Roby's still healthy and pitching, and they just call him up as a taste at the end of the year. You're right, Brian. They could find themselves in a really bad situation, worse than it already is from a depth standpoint.
And it's again, it's only April 23rd, so I'm not going to paint the whole season, but this was a year of development. It was a year of growth, and the hope is stepping forward now to next year, 2026. You got Gray. Gray's going to be there at the top of the rotation, and Palante, and hopefully Liberatore. That's three guys. But there's going to be probably two openings next year, and right now it's McGreevy and we don't know.
Yeah, McGreevy and anybody.
And you just hope that and nothing against Kyle Gibson and Lance Lynn, who did what was expected of them last year, but a team that's trying to reload, retool, revamp, whatever. You just don't want to bring in 30-some-year-old veterans. You want to see young guys with upside.
Yeah. It's again, like you said, we don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves. We'll see how some of these guys rehab, see where they're at. But I don't know. It seems like these last 2 weeks for the St. Louis Cardinals in general, not just at the major league level, but organization wide, have been dauber down weeks. It really could not have gone much worse in a lot of ways, from the top of the organization to the bottom of the organization, from both a win-loss and a health standpoint. It's nice that some of these teams are competitive, but now they're starting to lose players. So, we'll see, Brian.
Yeah. And, they're going with three outfielders and Burleson and Donovan are their backups, I guess, at St. Louis. Donovan's hobbled a little bit too, although he's not on the IL. Yeah. But Thomas Sajaci's performed well, and he survived the return of Mason Wynn. Was that a surprise to you?
I'm nothing against Michael Ciani, who I'm sure is a gentleman. I'm sure he's terrific, but that was the only move to make for me. I know that some people wondered if it would be maybe Alec Burleson would find his way down because he's really struggled. I think some people were curious, Thomas Sajaci, if he's not going to get at bats, is it worth having him? I think you can make it bats for that kid. If you're willing to make it bats for Nolan Gorman, who I still, nothing against Nolan Gorman, but I'm just saying, like, there are at bats there, and there are utility tests for him to check off as he becomes a major league utility player. So I'm glad they made the decision. I was worried that it would be Sajaci. but they made the right decision, and that's the decision I would have made. And you know, I just Michael Ciani is a redundancy, Brian. And I'll let you take it from there.
Well, no, I've said it all along. Having Victor Scott and Michael Ciani both on the same roster makes no sense,
Mm-hmm.
especially when you're limited to 26 players and you've got to figure out how to handle the designated hitter, et cetera, et cetera. So, you know, Ciani made himself more expendable because in the limited role that he was in, he didn't hit when he needed to.
Mm-hmm.
And frankly, Jordan Walker, a lot of people have been upset about Jordan Walker's defense. It seems like Jordan Walker's defense is improving. Now, obviously, we talk about his offense separately, but I don't know that the Cardinals are going to miss much by not having Ciani to come in the late innings for Jordan Walker.
Yeah, it seems like such a waste of a roster spot to me, where you're only going to bring a guy in if your team is ahead, and you're only going to bring him in for an inning, maybe.
Yeah, yeah.
So I just think that there's a better way to utilize that role, and it looks like the Cardinals think that too, and I think that that's good for everybody's long-term outlook. Again, if in a week Thomas Sajacy has 3 at bats, then you can still make a move to send him down. Yeah, there's still an option. Maybe you bring Cesar Prieto up at that point. Not to say he deserves it or anything. Just like you have a bunch of utility options that are already kind of on the 40 man, or that are kind of interesting. Jose Fermin, you can bring them up. As you wait for Ciani's 10 days to pass if no one gets hurt before you can call him back up. So I just, it's the right move to make, whether you're looking at it myopically or otherwise. So I love it. I'm really happy that they made the move.
Yeah. Yep. Makes sense. And, Nolan Gorman and Jordan Walker are kind of on, they've been on a similar path in that they, former first rounders, underachievers, et cetera. What are you seeing between the two, and what's your feeling about the future?
I think that, Brian. Gorman is tough.
Put you on the spot there, I guess, huh?
No. So Gorman's tough for me because I feel like ever since his time in Peoria, there has been a clear, this is how you get Nolan Gorman out. And he adjusted to it in Springfield, but it was always really simple. You just hammer him with high fastballs, and then you beat him low with breaking pitches. And a lot of times, if he starts extending his strike zone with a high fastball, you don't even need to throw a breaking pitch to the plate. You can throw it in front of the plate, and he will go swinging for it. And as he's climbed the ladder, he's gotten a little bit better, and he's shown signs where he is not going to fall for that. But he's back to it. And it's amazing to me that some of these organizations that are pitching against him aren't doing this. When he has success, it's because he's getting breaking pitches in the zone early in counts. He knows what to look for there, or fastballs, where he can extend his arm and do something like.
And you got to ask yourself, why are the other teams doing that?
I don't get it. I ask myself all the time. I'm happy when it happens. I wish everybody would do it, but it doesn't seem like the steps that he's taken when he gets into those, what I call Gorman and Fuego moments, those 2-week spans where he's the hardest hitter in baseball to get out. He's never been able to make that who he is, or even some amalgamation of that as to who he is. And it didn't happen at AAA. It didn't happen in AA. It didn't happen in any of his major league stints. And as a matter of fact, he seems like he's regressing. Now, this all comes with the caveat that he's still not playing. He's still not hitting as bad as someone like Alec Burleson is. So I'm not trying to you have to look at that too. Like, he's not the only one doing this. But when you pair that up to, like you said, Jordan Walker, who is back to swinging at that slider on the outside corner all of the time. I mean, all of the time. And he's not adjusting to that. And I guess no one's telling him to, or he doesn't have the discipline to be able to. And these two things are happening at once. And they're the same issues that we've dealt with now for what is it? It's 3 hitting coaches, right?
Yeah. I guess the Brant Brown parade's probably postponed at least, right?
A little bit, yeah. Fire Turner Ward, Brian. It's time to fire Turner Ward. But I think it's interesting that these guys are falling back into some really bad habits that aren't new for them. They're minor league long. They're pre-COVID. Well, not with Walker, but in Gorman's case, pre-COVID deep. So I don't know. That's been my frustration with those two. And at the same time, it seems like everybody's reverting back to like different batting stances and changing their batting stances. So I don't know. it's so easy to find things to be frustrated with when the team you are watching and following is not doing well. And here we are again, 3 weeks into the season, 4 weeks into the season, and it's just so easy to find so many things that are frustrating.
And on our forum at the Cardinal Nation, I'm the one constantly preaching patience, right?
Yeah.
You can't get, it's the 23rd of April, right? Don't get too excited. Give it time. But if the Cardinals, let's take the worst case scenario, and the Cardinals basically give up on Nolan Gorman and Jordan Walker. Who's behind them? Who's going to be the future hope to be a middle of the order bat? Alec Burleson?
Yeah.
I don't know. There's no Goldschmidt coming. There's no Arenado coming. And these guys have got to come through for the Cardinals to have any hope, I think, of trying to elevate themselves back where they're, a playoff contender and play playoff quality baseball.
Yeah, Brian, that's the point. That's it exactly. Because then what are you doing? Say that those guys don't. The only person that you have really, and no disrespect to Chase Davis or Bernal or Jimmy Crooks, who hit a home run tonight, the only guy you really have then is JJ Wetherholt. And all you're doing then is regurgitating the same issue that you're in right now, which is you're trying to get too much out of a player who might not even be capable of what you want him to do. So yeah, like the long-term health is still on Jordan Walker and Nolan Gorman's shoulders.
And in the offseason, they're not, even if the team start playing better and attendance turns around, they're not going to go out and sign a Pete Alonso. They're just not. They're not. Yeah. That's not what the Cardinals do. Now, maybe they can find a trade to get another Goldschmidt or another Arenado, but the assets that they have to trade, you look at a Brendan Donovan who's played consistently well and say, gee, is he going to be the next Tommy Edman?
Yeah.
You hope not. You hope not. Yeah. But he's a guy that other teams are going to want. Gee, why? Because he's, a very consistently good player.
Yeah. And, all of a sudden you're in Tampa Bay, the Tampa Bay Ray territory where this guy's beginning to cost a little bit of money. We better get rid of him. Because that's when he has the most value, when he doesn't cost money. And also because you're not competitive and you're looking to maximize the asset you have for when you get back into that competitive window. So, Brian, I don't know. Again, I'm like you. I've always tried to practice patience. I've always tried to preach it as well. And I'm not so against what's happening. I just think it needs to level out. Something needs to level out. And I don't know what that is, because right now the fortune of the organization is back to spiraling in a way that hopefully in a week we're laughing about.
And, the bullpen has been a major disappointment. And it was pretty obvious that the pen wasn't going to be as strong this year as last, probably. But, to see Fernandez struggle and Romero's inconsistent, and, it's concerning, I think. Leahy's been good. Maton's been pretty good until, his last outing. But, they're not even getting to Helsley. Helsley's, obviously you want to use your closer when you're ahead. And for some reason, even if they have a lead in, going into the late innings, they can't seem to hold it long enough to get Helsley in the game.
Yeah, Brian, this dates back to, again, I say it a lot, but it dates back to a conversation we had prior, a couple of weeks ago when we were talking about Chris Roycroft and Ryan Fernandez. When these guys are trying, and, I know that the new talking point is you're trying to develop relievers, which to me is the craziest idea. I didn't even know you could develop a reliever. I thought that what ends up happening is you either get Matt Bowman or Seth Manis, who is just kind of there and eats innings until their arm blows up, or you get Ryan Helsley, and then every amalgamation in between. And these guys don't have shelf life. You don't develop relievers. They're either elite or they're recyclable. And that's just how a reliever is. So as they talk about developing relievers and wanting to be able to get, Chris Roycroft, who's down in Memphis now, but they wanted him to work on it at the major league level so that he knew how to adjust. And now they're doing it with Ryan Fernandez again. Even though he started leveling out, he's back to having terrible results. Send these guys down. You have so many expendable arms. Send them down. Let them work on this stuff at the minors. You can track pitching. Pitching data is easier than ever to find. Everybody has it, from extension to release point to spin to cut to break, everything. They have all that information. It's right there. let them work out into the minors, and then give your kids who you're trying to turn in to the next generation of St. Louis Cardinals superstars a chance to win instead of learning how to lose.
Now, let me backtrack comments I made just 10 or 15 minutes ago. Memphis has 11 relievers. That's active. That's a fact. But of them, only 4 are on the 40-man roster. Munoz, Ludus, O'Brien, and Roycroft. That's it. So, and there's not a lot of others on the 40-man that you could, do stuff with. I guess Hellman, who's on the injured list right now, or Fermin. But they don't have a lot of options on a 40-man right now.
Yeah, I would still go to them. I still think our good friend Peter Riley O'Brien deserves to be at the major league level. Especially over Ryan Fernandez. O'Brien, he has filthy stuff. He's been really good at Memphis, aside from like one appearance. And you need to see what you have there. Why does he get the preference? Why does Ryan Fernandez, who is struggling and is only drowning, get put in that position when Riley O'Brien was somebody we were told last year was going to have an impact on the bullpen. This spring, they were talking about having an impact on the bullpen. They got worried about his health, and now he's swimming down in Memphis, just waiting for an opportunity. They're not doing themselves any favors. They're not doing the kids any favors.
Yeah, and obviously Fernandez built some goodwill last year, especially the first half. The second half wasn't as good, but at some point, just like they did with Roycroft, they got to say, listen, you're hurting us. You got to go down and get yourself right. And we'll see what happens. When the Cardinals finish this road trip, I suspect there may be something else going on, but who knows?
Yeah, we'll find out. The last time when we had this conversation about Roycroft, we had a feeling that when they got off the road trip that they'd have a roster move, and that is exactly what happened. So you're probably on it again, Brian.
Well, I mean, it's patterns, right? We follow patterns, patterns of behavior.
That's it, man. That's it.
And as we talked about previously as well, another pattern of behavior is how aggressive is a system in promoting players, pushing players, bringing them forward. And again, the new regime hasn't been in place long enough in player development to know, are they going to push a Roby, or are they going to, take a safer pick with Radjic, or are they just going to have a bullpen game every 5th day? And Sem's rotation spot doesn't come around again until Saturday, I think. So they have a little bit of time to figure it out. But it's the starting pitching depth issue is a real problem right now. And again, I'm repeating myself, but in a year when they're trying to develop these guys to figure out who the next generation of the rotation is going to be. So we just have to hope that these guys can get. Hance is the only one that's on the 60-day IL, and we don't know when we're going to see him. And if we do, how many innings he's going to be able to throw. But I guess the other guys all still have a chance to be back before hopefully too long.
It doesn't take long for pitching in an organization to almost hit rock bottom. And you have to figure they're not at rock bottom yet. Rock bottom would be if something happened to Michael McGreevy, knock on wood, because that's it. At that point, then it becomes super dicey. McGreevy's gotten off to a really good start on Tuesday night, which is a positive. He'll have the double start this week. So I'm anxious to see how he pitches on Sunday, because I think this is his first dual week of pitching. That first week was kind of weird, but I think it's his first dual week of pitching, and I'm anxious to see how he looks Sunday as compared to Tuesday.
And what Kyle's alluding to is that when AAA went to the minor leagues went to a 6-game week against the same opponent, obviously with a 5-man rotation, that means whoever started on Tuesday their turn will come again on Sunday. And that's a challenge for a pitcher because the other team got a full look at him on Tuesday and they remember what they saw, and he's going to be throwing the same stuff on Sunday. So it's a good test for a starter to have to face that same opponent twice in 1 week.
Yeah, so that'll be something worth keeping an eye on for the pitching depth of the St. Louis Cardinals, how Michael McGreevy looks both Tuesday night and Sunday, and how they compare to each other.
Well, Kyle, I didn't have any hot takes from you this week. Do you have any that you're particularly proud of?
Brian, would you like to do a little teasing for next week?
Sure.
Okay, so I don't know if I'll be able to, but over the last week, I guess, I don't know if I'll be able to write or not. I would like to write an article or a post or something. I don't know if I'll have time. But over the last week, I put out polls on Twitter or X or however you want to call it, whatever you want to call it, kind of gauging fan reception, Cardinal social media reception to if JJ Wetherholt had this major league career, would it match the hype and the draft position that he was drafted on? And I've gone through Ray Langford, which was the first one. And spoiler here, and you can look it up on Twitter, but I think 80 something percent of people said yes. If JJ Wetherholt had the career that Ray Langford had, that would match the hype and it'd be worth the 7th overall pick. That was the first one. I was surprised by that. I usually when I run these polls, there's a lot of expectations I could put on the kids. Well, I did it with all kinds of players after that. I think I did it with 6 or 7 players, including Colton Wong, just to have another Cardinal comparison. But Daniel Murphy, Carlos Guillen, like various different types of players throughout the pantheon of the last 20 years of baseball. And I think it might be something interesting to go over, how people thought of it, some comments. And my hope is to write about it and also give what I think are reasonable, optimistic, and reasonable pessimistic expectations for someone like JJ Wetherholt.
Well, that raises a question, and we're not going to go into detail on it now because we're about the end of our time, but just at a very, because we're going to talk about the draft a lot in the upcoming weeks and next couple of months, but drafting 7th overall, do you think the Cardinals will go for another hitter? Forget the players, forget who's available, forget all that. Do you think they'll go for another hitter, or do you think they'll go for a pitcher?
I think in this draft, it would be a hitter. I think that, the 5th overall is really interesting because the only 2 pitchers that are in that kind of bracket, there's a couple guys who might be a little further back in like the top 10 of a lot of rankings, but it comes down to the collegiate lefty, Jamie Arnold, and Seth Hernandez, the prep righty. And the prep righty has all kinds of skills, all kinds of talent. You could see how he could become somebody like Jackson Jobe, the high ceiling starter for Detroit.
Arnold's but you don't think they're going to take those guys?
I don't. I think partially because neither of those guys will be there at 5. Oh. I think that's the other issue in this. But I think more importantly, they're going to be in a position in this draft where they're going to be able to make a deal with somebody at 5. Again, total guess. Yep. All of the national pundits will tell you that this draft is not as high end at the top.
Right.
So I think they'll put themselves in a position where at 5, unless say that they have Ethan Holiday as 1 on their board, way 1 on their board, he makes it past Colorado and he ends up going 5th and they can draft him. I think they're going to be in a position where they can cut a deal with somebody. Somebody who they might be able to save a couple extra million on and then move on from there. And I just think it's safer to do it with a bat than it is to do with an arm because we spent half of this episode, if not longer, talking about the dangers of organizational arm injuries.
Yeah. All right. That's a fair point. And again, we'll talk a lot more about the draft, but the reason I even asked the question was right now, Wetherholt is it. He is the great hope. Now, if there's a new guy, maybe there'll be 2 guys who will be the great hope, right?
Yeah.
That's where I was going.
That's exactly what I think it will probably end up happening. To get into Wetherholt one more time, it's just such a burden to have on your shoulders, And we know with Crooks and Bernal, who are probably, the other 2 with Chase Davis, like it's just such a burden to put on a catcher to be an offensive threat because we know that catching takes longer to develop than anything else. And it's just so tough to ask them to do that. And Chase Davis he's got an inside pitch issue that he needs to work through and commit to using the opposite field with the outside pitch. And he's just not there yet at all. So,
but hey, it's only the first month of the season, right?
Exactly. I think he'll get there. It's a lot to put on one kid, even if the kid has all of the intangibles that you could ever want or ask for.
All right. Well, with that, we will close the April 23rd edition of Wednesday with Walton and Reis, and we will see you back on the 30th. Kyle, thanks again for your insight.
Brian, you're the best. Thank you.
Or at least second best.
Nah.